While people are getting themselves joined in there, I went ahead and dropped the HackMD link for everybody to go ahead and sign in for the day. And always good to see you join in here, Justin. Almost called you Docker. Kind of like a Tim Apple scenario here going on.
I'm not called Docker.
The CNCF Oros project. I'm going to guess that might be Steve.
Yes. Well, and others, but yeah, it's just joined CNCF Sandbox like a week ago or so in the last round of Sandbox project editions.
Morning, folks.
It is Steve.
Your name is now
yes,
or a Sandbox.
Give me 1 second here. Oh, so yeah, I guess it's still early, so we're not ready to start just yet.
I figure we got like maybe 1 more minute, but I dropped the HackMD out there earlier for everybody to sign in. Looking forward to hearing what's happening with all the governance stuff. And now we got Harbor joining, all the virtual names jumping in today.
Sorry about that. It's Orlin. I'm the community manager for Harbor, and I just left my previous meeting, and I still have that handle. Sorry for that.
No worries. I'm happy to see someone from Harbor jumping in over here.
Hey there. Welcome. We're at the 5, so.
Okay.
All right, I guess first one is you, Justin.
Yeah, so so on the governance docs, I just now updated. I pushed a new version that covers all the feedback I got so far. I think there was a bunch of clarifications and kind of tweaks around that people fed either on the GitHub issue or via other means. So if you could all just review it as it is now, because I think it's pretty much good to go. I mean, I think there's scope for clarification and expansion, but I'm not sure if it's necessary to kind of necessarily do it all immediately. I think the intent is clear, but if anyone feels that anything is still confusing, and I'm happy to still make changes, but I'd kind of like to go ahead to go through and get that approved by the plan is to have it approved by the existing notary maintainers and also ask the ones who are not active, which is to stand down and appoint new maintainers at the same time. And also to then move, as we agree with CNCF TSC, to move the existing notary repo into the notary project org, and we'll set up the new structure of projects. So there'll be a whole bunch of actions to take place kind of as this is approved. We'll just do them all basically at the same time.
And so right now we still have this defined as a draft and a WIP over there, a work in progress.
Yeah, I mean, if I'll convert it into final later on. I just want to get another people to read through it again first, just to see if there's anything else that's still clear, or I didn't reply if they feel they didn't get their points addressed. I think I addressed everything, but I just wanted people to review it, so I left it whip until that's the case. But I'd like to do this quickly as it's been outstanding for some time.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are looking for expediency at this point. Speaking of that, what is your thought process on timeline?
I was going to try and get this done ideally by next week, but I'm going to have to, it may take a little longer, but that kind of time scale, hopefully sooner, but I'll just try and get it done as quickly as possible at this point. So if everyone could give feedback by end of today on the wording as is now, and I'll just see if there's anything that needs tweaking basically, and just resolve any comments that haven't I don't think GitHub decided to auto close them. So whatever, just feedback by today would be great.
Cool. Any other? We're good. Silence is acceptance.
Just feel free to Slack or email me if you want to raise anything not on the GitHub issue as well.
Yeah, and obviously we'll iterate, as we need over time. So just get
it's not designed to be an absolutely final immutable form for all time. It's just designed to be a improvement that lets us move forward quickly now, so and make changes as needed.
All right, signature format, Melind.
Hi everyone. Give me a second. Let me share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So we have been working on signature format. We had JWS and Dizzy as two formats that we were exploring further. We have had discussions with internal compliance and security teams. Some of it is still ongoing, so this should be taken with a grain of salt. This is the current direction where we are landing. It's updated in the PR. I don't think the recommendation will change from this point onward, but we are still doing some due diligence with security and compliance groups. And we're saying there's basically some consensus on using JWS JSON instead of Dizzy, and I've laid out kind of a high-level summary. You can see it here, and then there are other details. This is the PR that Shiva submitted. There are other sections which detail out, like for each of the format, example and specific pros and cons.
Sorry, could you just link to this doc in the chat, because I can't see which PR it actually is.
Yeah, sure.
I haven't got it open right now.
Yeah, let me do that.
I got it out there. I'll throw it in the notes as well.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I was updating the meeting notes just before. I think the main reasons are that JWS has a RFC standard. It supports the feature set that we are looking for in terms of support for certificate chains, key IDs, signed and unsigned attributes. Unsigned attributes, example being TSA signature, additional signed attributes as in X5 and certificate chains. There are valid concerns on vulnerabilities related to JWT and JWS, primarily JWT. These are known to the security groups that we talk with, and they have specific recommendations on how to deal with them. Basically, there needs to be a validation layer on top of calling any underlying JWT, JWS implementation to kind of use a specific profile or narrow down a surface area. So no alg equal to none, or only use asymmetric, narrow down the asymmetric to certain specific encryption and hashing algorithms. We can detail some of that out once this PR goes through. And
would that be something that's defined by Notary, or would every single implementer have to then implement the profile to then ensure that their implementation is secure? Or is that something that we're going to do for people?
I think my view is Notary should define the subset, that profile, including which attributes of JWS, what set of algorithms, and anybody should be able to use it. I think it doesn't really help if folks have to re-implement this specific thing, and that kind of broadens the area where people can make mistakes. So I would like to have a model where we have a single implementation.
Okay, so we're kind of doing it like we're going to basically make our own subset of JWS that would be using?
Yeah, it would be a layer which depends on one of the existing libraries, but you go through that contract instead of directly calling the underlying library for validation.
Sorry, but I mean, would we be publishing a specification for the subset, or just an implementation of the subset?
I think we should publish a specification, and then the implementation would be in the Notary CLI libraries.
So earlier you were saying that we had come to this recommendation. Who's the we in this one? Is that something that we're involved in the community directly in, or?
Currently it is, I was working on this, Shive was working on this, Pritesh working on this. So it's from Microsoft feedback and AWS feedback, and this is still a proposal, so we can gather more feedback.
To put some context to this, Microsoft and AWS have substantial crypto boards that we have to get things approved by to implement. We've been trying to go with the Dizzy format. We recognize that there's other work, kind of shift left, if you will, that is proposing to move forward with that. We'd like to have, we want to align with that so that there can be some consistency across the workflows. We just couldn't get it approved yet. So to be able to reach our shipping goals today and be accepted by our crypto boards, which is the way we represent the customers that come and expect these formats, this was where we landed for now. And when I say for now, this is what we're trying to ship for this first release, which is what we'll talk about later.
But I just have a question there. So that if we're designing our own layer on top of JWS, does that not have to also be approved by these boards before it can be used? Like, I just don't get the difference between that and using Dizzy.
In some cases, those recommendations already exist because these formats are already in wide use. So some of that effort has already been done. I think partly it would be getting some of that in a public spec and publishing it as part of this. And I think there's little more to this with regards to Dizzy. We have been actively trying to figure out, like, Dizzy seems like a good fit. It's a simple format, should be much simpler to implement. There are some implementations, but I think we probably would need to submit PRs and there is the certificate chain and TSA support that is ongoing. The major points where we cannot adopt Dizzy right away, at least from from the standpoint of us making the recommendation is it doesn't have RFC yet. That was one of the pushback. It's used in relatively few projects, so it needs to be kind of more proven or more in the field and tested and issues surfaced, etc. And the third one is around the kind of the certification of specific implementations and getting them approved, which can be done once few of the initial one, or at least the RFC one is solved and we have TSA and certificate chain implemented in it. And there's another item on the list related to signing and verification, which proposes how we can have an extensibility point around signature format. So we are not tied to a specific envelope. And if we have consensus to support additional formats, we can build it into Notary.
Exactly. That was what I was just suggesting with my recent comment in the chat, which is that there's no reason why we need to support strictly one format except for strict interoperability. And that's a meta goal that we need to make clear as part of this project. Are we aiming for strict interoperability? That's fine if we aim for that, but right now it's not clear. And if we're not, there's no reason not to support additional signature formats.
I mean, if you think about the content that we're going to be publishing from MCR, Docker Hub, ECR, and whoever else, whether NVIDIA and others, there's going to be a format that needs to be adopted so that there's consistency across those validations. That's the whole cross registry.
I think that I think that we are trying to have interoperability, and so I would say that we should have. I mean, I think it's fine to support multiple signature formats over time, but they should be approved as part of the specification, and we should expect all clients to support that revision of the specification to support at least support at least reading all the formats and verifying signatures from that point of view, because I mean, we wouldn't necessarily expect them to generate signatures with any application to generate signatures in any format, because the application might prefer one format. But I think we would recommend that clients support any signature format that's not been superseded or removed, because we very much want to support full interoperability and not have some clients that can't understand some signatures, which is always problematic.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I was just commenting that the goal of strict interoperability is not clear right now.
We kind of set that from the original to do the cross-registry validations and content copying, not movement copying. But I do want to be really sensitive and careful here. Like we're not trying to shut the door on Dizzy by any means. This is a matter of what we could get approved to be able to ship that our customers would actually use while that format evolves and becomes a standard. So it's not, shutting the door, and we were very specific. We wanted to make sure that there was a concrete set of things that said, these are the things that need to be done for us to be able to move to the Dizzy standard. So there's very clear actionable items. These are the things that have to be resolved. I can't imagine that you're not going to have this same challenge as these get surfaced to crypto boards in, I don't call it the Intoto project or whichever projects that are kind of moving from the left that would meet the notary as things get deployed. So it's not a matter of no or ever. It's like, this is where we are today. And as that stuff, as Dizzy gets formalized and can get accepted by the crypto boards, then we can reconsider, then say version N of Notary now supports, whatever we call this thing, and then we can kind of move forward from there.
To add on to the extensibility, there needs to be I kind of have the next agenda item is actually a discussion that I opened in the repository that has few points around extensibility, trying to get feedback before we make progress there. But the idea is similar to what Justin said, that like in this specific one for signature format, we would be flexible such that, that's the goal, to enable additional formats, but not without consensus. Like it doesn't allow somebody to just inject a new format. It needs to go through the notary project and approved, and then we push out a new version of client, etc. That's the form of extensibility we are thinking for signature format. Were there any other questions? We have 2 more agenda items to get to. So this is currently in the PR form. There's already conversation, so feel free to put in feedback here, and Shiva is driving this PR. All right, shall I move to the next item? All right, so the next one was signing and validation. So this is really, I opened a new discussion, and there are a few points that I wanted to, questions, high level kind of design decisions and direction that I wanted to surface with the larger group before we make more concrete effort in these areas. So at a high level, it's kind of layering and separation of concerns, how things split between Docker, Notary, and signing providers. By signing providers, I mean when Notary interacts with a cloud service-based signing or a PKCS 11-based hardware token, customer-owned PKI local certs, anywhere where you're offloading the signing, that's being called as signing provider. So the Notary itself doesn't generate the signature.
So on the first 2 questions, I think they're very, the separation of concerns, it's very clear. So Notary v2 is not tightly integrated with OCI artifacts, but it is tight. I mean, I think that the assumption is, well, sorry, OCI artifacts is I'm not sure, did you mean OCI artifacts? Because it's also...
As an artifact, as in, does it, I guess what I mean to say is, should Notary v2 be aware of any specific storage, references, pull, push interactions, or it's just sign this payload, somebody passes it a payload?
Well, I mean, it's a specification for signing in registries. So I think the most it's allowed to know about is OCI manifests. Sorry, is OCI descriptors.
Yes.
And that's probably the limit. So I wouldn't recommend it knows about more than a descriptor.
The manifest is pretty key to that. I'm not sure what the distinction we're trying to make. I mean,
sorry, the
yes.
the descriptor, the descriptor is what an object in a registry is described as in terms of hash and what its content is and what its size is and so on. So it's everything that you need to know about an object to retrieve it.
Yeah. By using the...
And it's kind of, so it's an abstraction of how do I retrieve an object. It's the closest thing we have to a URL in that sense.
Yep.
Yeah, by using the descriptor, you can point to an image, a multi-platform image, another signature, another artifact, yep. Helm charts, whatever you want to point to.
Yeah. I have a general idea of how things are represented in the registry, as in image indexes or image manifest or any other type of manifest that we are supporting, usually top level manifests and then references to blobs or other artifacts, and all kind of pointers and registries are basically as descriptors. So my thought was that Docker CLI or whoever...
So, sorry, the second question about Docker CLI is very straightforward. Notary has nothing to do with the Docker CLI. And it was a little bit misleading the way that's the Microsoft team did a prototype based on the Docker CLI just for convenience and showing a kind of pseudo what something might look like, but there is no connection between Notary and the Docker CLI at all, and there never has been, never was with Notary v1. The Docker CLI does include tools that it does indeed include tools that support Notary v1, but that's a Docker decision, and this is nothing to do with the Docker isn't a totally independent consumer of the Notary specification and tooling from anyone else, as is anyone else. The question about where in the container ecosystem Notary should be integrated is important. But the assumption is probably that, I mean, we certainly need to produce libraries that people can consume anywhere they might want to produce or verify content. The actual place where these things take place is actually, I mean, the specification leaves it quite flexible. For example, you know, if signatures are detached, you can add them at any time. So you don't necessarily need them to be integrated in the tool that creates the image. But to be honest, it's very convenient if they're integrated in the tool that creates the images, because then you don't have to have two tools. Verification, again, there's a lot of discussion about where the best place for verification is. Is it in an ingress, you know, is it an admission controller in Kubernetes, or is it in other places? And to be honest, you know, I think, you know, again, producing libraries and potentially a few reference use cases is the best idea. But the way we did it with Notary v1 is that Notary v1 had its own CLI that could do all the things, but it was more a kind of reference implementation. And while people did use it in production, it was not very friendly to use it, and it didn't really promote adoption because it was complicated to use, and it's probably better to promote adoption by people using tools that are better integrated with the other tools they're using.
So I still have questions on the first point that Notary v2 being aware of the descriptor. Is there a specific reason it needs to be aware? The question really is the Notary v2 interface, like some kind of, you can see under extensibility points, there's an example interface, sign some payload. Can it sign any payload? Basically, we're building all of this infrastructure, or we're building libraries and signing providers, etc., where you have this CLI which can sign things and can interact with different kind of signing providers. And should the usage of that be limited to just signing container descriptors? Can it sign other types of content too? That is kind of the fundamental question I'm asking.
Yeah, no, this is where I'm trying to figure out the nuance that you're touching on, Justin, because yeah, you acquire something through a descriptor, but the goal that we've set here is anything gets put in a registry can be signed. So there is some coupling to.
Well, I think, I mean, that comes down to the question of what we sign in the registry case. Are we signing the descriptor, or are we signing the content? And I think that's that. And I think, as far as I know, that's still effectively an open question, and we need to make that decision of what exactly do we sign, because we discussed this the other.
We have been signing the digest.
From the format, we're talking about the descriptor, and we haven't specified that the media type is limited in that. So it should be able to do any descriptor with any media type.
We had examples here. For example, with JWS JSON, again, this is not final. This is the descriptor which sits inside a wrapped payload. So the wrapped payload is
that. Yeah, I mean,
Justin, what is it that you're concerned? Because I think the point is that we use the digest to do the computation for the signature. So
Well, it's
there's two
complicated
things.
because
what is it pointing at, and what is it
there's-
persisted as?
It's more complicated because like there's the digest of what are you signing the digest of and which digest? Because if your signature algorithm, for example, doesn't use SHA-256, or indeed your registry doesn't use SHA-256, for example, like you're not signing the digest of the content.
We're signing the digest of the manifest that points to that represents the thing that we are signing. So if it's an image, there's a manifest and a digest of that manifest as a descriptor. If you're signing a Helm chart, the Helm charts for now currently use the image. If you're signing an SBOM, as we proposed, would, because an SBOM itself is a reference to something else. That's yet a descriptor, but it happens to be an artifact.
No, sorry. To be precise, what?
It's a question with signing
what
the manifest
physical
of the layers.
payload are you signing?
Here's the example of the payload.
Yeah. So.
And
everything within subject manifest there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're signing that should not, subject manifest should be called descriptor then or something. I mean, that is a descriptor. Yeah. So you're signing a descriptor.
It's a
but
descriptor
are you signing,
it's a manifest descriptor to be specific. Like we don't have support for signing blobs. Like the layers.
I'm going to disagree on that.
Yeah, I think we should specifically be signing descriptors because I think it's the only thing that.
I'll kind of try to short circuit the discussion. We can discuss about the payload specifics separately. What I'm trying to get is a higher level concern.
Yeah, I'll say that any implementation may want to limit what they sign, but overall, the notary format should say any descriptor.
I mean, if the question is, I mean, I think the answer is that there's a layered set of interfaces. Yes, there's an interface for sign with a payload, but that's not useful to expose in a CLI. That's useful, but it will be like you will need a library that has a sign interface as the underlying, for a Go signer or something in Go terms for in order to be able to sign anything. But the CLI should be more opinionated and and expect you to be signing what's actually defined by Notary V2, i.e. the specific document that we decide to sign.
Yeah, and from the other side, as one of the people working around Podman, we absolutely need the cryptography part of signing and verification to be a library that doesn't directly link to any specific registry client and probably doesn't directly link to any Azure or AWS client. Just do the core crypto and allow the integration with other tools to happen on a higher level. That level would probably need to be provided by the Notary project as well. But if this drags in 10 megabytes of dependencies with their own configuration, that would be problematic to integrate.
Yeah, totally. I think those are very valid concerns, and I think we see it in the same way. So under extensibility points, I have signing providers. There needs to be a definition of how exactly the signing providers plug in. Like you said, nothing in here is going to be baked to specific end signing providers. It's an interface and a provider model. Okay, I think the general sense, I'll try to summarize on the first one. The underlying library, the notary library that we write may not be tied to descriptors or OCI concepts, but the CLI would be. And that's kind of summary I'm getting based
I mean,
on this.
yeah, I mean, at least I think some of the, I mean, the library should probably have an interface that validates that what you've put in to be signed is a valid document to be signed according to the specification at some layer of it of the library, so that you can say, no, sorry, you've just passed something that's not a valid document for a notary V2 signature.
Okay, I'm also like we can table this. We can get back to this. There are.
I think just to separate, just to kind of put a bow on it. I think the idea is what is in the spec versus what is the CLI experiences, so that there actually is an end-to-end experience. Because I think at the end of the day, we don't want to, if we said we wanted to consider signing layers and related to base layers, and we punted it, several months ago. So the idea that we could sign any descriptor would enable us to assign layers and blobs and so forth. The experience, though, that we've been iterating, and this is the tie back to the artifacts works, is there is a Discover API that has a pattern for what it knows to respond and return. So I think we just have to figure out what's the balance versus the spec and the current implementations and how we're going about it for those libraries.
My view on that is that because the fundamental registry thing is a descriptor, we should sign descriptors, but the current mechanisms we're going to provide won't provide a way initially to discover, say, a blob signature. But we have had people with use cases for blob signatures, so those could be added later. So currently we'll only be providing a way of discovering and identifying manifest signatures. But the underlying signature mechanics should support blob signatures because they're just descriptors signatures.
I mean, that's simpler without descriptors. Just provide the digest of the thing you are trying to sign. To me,
well, it's more than the digest, because if you look at the
because there are extra annotations, and then you have to reconcile which annotations are signed, which aren't signed, and how that fits into the rest of the process. It's not
so the descriptor should have all those annotations in it.
Right.
And
and it's got the size, so you've got the size validated by the signature, which is important to stop. So because the protocol assumes you can trust the size as well.
I would say the input should be the descriptor to sign, and the output of this should be a signed something, artifact, something like that, in an OCI index or similar format that you can then use another tool to push to any registry. Yeah. And then maybe our client will have that registry integration already in there, but it would be nice to be able to just have that dropped out as a file on the machine, especially for offline use cases, disconnected cases.
It does need to do offline signatures as part of that, and then we can batch the graph up and decide to push. I think what I hear is the spec will be focused on descriptor because it allows us to evolve and the client experience will focus on manifest for now. But as we can add blobs, that means the notary spec doesn't need to change. It's just the client experiences can evolve for the kind of experiences they can support. And it doesn't prohibit somebody else from innovating some new ideas outside of that, onto the existing notary spec using other tooling.
I would appreciate some of the comments to be, or summarization or opinions to be put in as feedback here. We can iterate on that. I get the general sense of what we want for the first question. There's a related question there. Should Notary V2 produce the signature manifest in addition to the signature blob? Or that is the concern of the layer calling it?
You're saying the full OCI artifact definition?
Yeah, my initial thought was Notary V2, or at least kind of scratch it. It's just that it'll produce the signature blob or the envelope, and whoever is calling it will put together the manifest that goes along with it, store it locally, and when you push original image, manifest, layers, everything gets pushed, and then signature manifest and little blobs, that is signature envelope, gets pushed. But I'm open to hear opinions there.
I would be tempted to say have the entire artifact output including the blob, and then just format that in, you know, if it's in a disconnected environment, then like an OCI layout notation. But I'm not firm on that requirement.
I think that we should certainly have ability to produce it. I mean, obviously producing the signature blob is the most important thing, but we should probably have code for producing everything you need, because otherwise people will have to implement it themselves anyway. So we might as well implement it for them.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, that kind of makes sense. We have some examples of what the corresponding signature manifest looks like. Yeah, I think there are aspects in there which wouldn't be preferable to be repeated in the calling layer. All right. We can talk about verification next week. I think that topic alone can take quite some time, just on Notary V2 and verification, how that be supported. I want to move on to the next one on the extensibility points. I'm gonna skip the signing providers. We'll get back to that if we have time. I want to focus on this extensibility with respect to verification. I'm basically saying there are different type of identity types, and some of the verification steps can change or need flexibility or forking off based on the identity type. Like some examples that I have is like cloud-based identity, which means key is remote and signing is remote. PKCS 11 example would be hardware token as a YubiKey or some HSM that you have access to. Signing is provided by that provider. You can have customer-owned PKIs, which are available as local cert, password protected, contains the private key. These are a few examples. And then I'm calling out that there may be a need for public key retrieval. We can get into the details of this. There's just examples where you have a logical key ID in the signature and you want to translate that to a public key by calling some external interface. That is one. And second is a revocation check. Like, for example, if the identity provider is a standard PKI, you may rely on CRL or CSP. We are yet to land on what revocation mechanisms look like. You may have hardware tokens, which if you're not linked with the PKI, it's either self-signed certificates or you didn't link it with a certificate at all. It's just a key pair. It may not even have a notion of revocation. And you may have custom revocation checks, which were completely different than CRL and OCSP. This is specifically for cloud service providers to give the mechanism in a way different than CRL or OCSP.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure to include the option that the revocation can be part of the public key distribution. If we have a notion of timeliness for the distribution of the keys, you can then use that natively for the revocation checks as well.
So that would be, would that, I guess what I'm trying to define is like, can we define a single interface for these extensibility points, and then various providers that plug in can then jump off? I think. Well,
no, I don't think that you can do that with the revocation though, because again, there's different points in the process where this could come. And if it's not really baked in all the way, people will just ignore this check and use revoked keys, which would be a huge problem.
Marina, I think to be fair, I think what Milind is trying to say here is just defining the interface for verification providers, for notary verification providers. So let's say within the Docker runtime, they could have different ways to do revocation behind the scenes, but that's not what this API worries about.
I mean, well, there's two ways to design it. There's either you have verification plugins that you just pass them a standard set of things, and they like the message and maybe some known public keys, and then they handle revocation in their own way, or we have a standard set of or semi-standard set of interfaces where you pass, here's the revocation data for this thing and whatever. But it sounds to me like the design that's being suggested for the providers is such that there's no way to have a standard set of APIs that handles the kind of the different kinds of revocation that different providers might need. So it makes sense potentially just to have kind of have the provider handle what's needed internally and potentially have some standard ways of passing additional data that the client needs to provide, if any, to these providers.
So I'm proposing the second model that you described. So I haven't split that description of what the overall verification steps look like, but have the core integrity check implementation within Notary. So you end up supplying that component, the signature, the public key, and it knows about the signature format. It can open that up and verify the payload. And there are aspects of, so integrity check is one part, and then there is revocation, or even before you, there's revocation, and there is tying it to trust verification. That is tying the key mentioned in the payload to a policy or anything else that says, these are my trust, this is my set of trust anchors. I'll detail that out in the document, but the model is integrity check is standard and gets done within Notary V2. Trust verification I still have to think about, but these are the other two, that like public key retrieval and revocation check would be different based on the identity types that these providers support. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, I think I understand the approach you're proposing. Yeah, that makes a little bit more sense.
Okay, any thoughts or comments there?
I mean, I just still think that this is a core component of the system that we're going to want to make sure that people do correctly, because it's a really key piece of it. But that's it, yeah.
I agree. I think when we detail out how extensibility really works, either with respect to signing format or signing providers, how they can plug in, or how steps within the verification can be offloaded. I think those are the places where we can discuss in detail, like how to do it in a proper way and security concerns.
Yeah, exactly. I think my key concern here is that it should be extensible enough to support multiple signing and verification procedures. That's really only my main concern.
Yep. All right. That's about it. I think this was mainly kind of getting a general direction before we get too deep on these topics. I think the next item is by Steve.
Did you want to go back and talk more about the validation? You said, because we only have a couple of minutes left.
So that part was really the signing providers. I touched upon it a bit. I think one of the questions there was also, and this is a scoping question which is related to the next discussion, what kind of identity types should Notary V2 support in RC1 or in GA? I think this will, and I have some examples here. I think we need to agree upon what the core set of supported identity types would be, at least for the initial release. So then we can focus our efforts on that.
I dropped a few more in the comments and thinking specifically of either an HSM or Vault with the transit plugin. And there are a couple of different ways that people might want to go through and extend that.
Yep. So the idea is many of these like HSMs or hardware tokens, or even other types of services, if they implement PKCS11, then we can readily integrate with it.
Yeah, for me, part of the challenge is going to be Notary is not standalone. To me, it is a standalone component, but it is part of a bigger system that is going through with, say, Spiffy Spire and Toto, other tooling out there that's going through and verifying the build. And so that actual signing step may happen outside of the actual build cluster. And so having a way that Notary can call out to that and make that request would be nice.
Got it. Elaborate a bit on that. I mean, yes, what you initially said, but I got a little lost with.
So the big concern is we wouldn't want to have a long-term signing key ever sent to a potentially untrusted build cluster where something could potentially get hacked in there. And so having that key stored outside of that whole cluster, offline HSM, something like that, where it's not easily accessible, and then you access that going through some kind of custom API or client API, or maybe it's not custom, but it is something that's not built into Notary.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what that's what the cloud-based remote signing is, but it's also what I think almost all signing will be some kind of remote signing.
Yeah.
Actually, our experience with Notary V1 was that the PKS11 and YubiKey support was not actually widely used because most people didn't do the signing somewhere where they actually physically had the token. I mean, it was used a little bit with YubiKeys for some use cases, but I would rather in a way that even that was implemented as a remote signing interface. And even if your endpoint was in fact local, you still use the remote signing interface for doing that, because the supporting and testing PKS11 devices built into Notary V1 was always a pain. And whereas just supporting a remote interface, even if the other end is local, actually just makes it easier to test and separate out concerns, and then people can then use a remote PKS11 device or whatever if they wire it up.
The scenario you said, Brandon, falls under remote signing. I'll actually flip this. So there should be custom signing provider or remote signing, and an example is cloud-based. And you can have any other service too that you can call out to.
Yep, sounds good to me.
And just to reinforce the extensibility, I added a comment to, was it Milo that added that? I mean, we've always said that the Notary client will have no dependency on any, specific product or project outside of it per se. In other words, vendor or cloud provider specific. It'll have extensibility so that any key vault provider can be used. Obviously, various cloud and vendor projects may implement Notary, but Notary itself won't have a dependency or, of course, of any cloud provider, or even key vault provider. This was one of the big things we wanted to separate from V1, is that the keys can be or external to the Notary storage.
I think that was about it. I think I can use this feedback to detail out, and then we can have specific PRs that go into details. Let me see. I think Pritesh is there on the call. Tejaswani, Shive. Is there anything else that any other questions we wanted to ask with respect to extensibility or the layering? All right. Yeah, we have
No, I think we are good. We have something to have some discussion points later. Yes.
All right. I think we can probably close. I think there was one more item.
There's a couple, but
Yeah.
we're not going to get anything in the next couple of minutes. I have a hard stop as well.
I was going to say, come on, Steve, you got 3 minutes. You can tell us what you're going to tell us.
I mean, we did put some of this in the project board. If you go to the root of Notary project, not Notary, but in the root of Notary project, there is some semblance of some projects and milestones. They haven't been updated since prototype 2, I think it was, but we will get more of that updated. And it's basically like, what can we do for the short term for this fall, so we can get something out so that customers can use, consume, and validate prior to the holiday season, where customers kind of lock things down. And then based on that feedback that customers can provide us, we'll iterate in whatever we call 2, whether it's an RC1 or RC2. Maybe there's naming is hard. I'm not going to try to get into it. We'll call it A and B for now, or whatever. But we'll have something in the spring when we have more time to iterate over time. So that's kind of what you'll see, is some kind of discussion there. So with that, I think we'll wrap up for the week.
Sorry, I had a quick question looking at the comments. One from Brandon. What do we exactly mean by OCI layout?
There's a specific format over, and I believe it's the image spec, where they talk about a tar file syntax with a index.json file at the top level, and it points to a bunch of blobs and descriptors and whatnot within there. So should be over in the OCI index.
Going back to the
image spec
conversation?
No, it's how we want to potentially have the output from Notary to be in a format that could be taken by someone else and pushed to any registry anywhere.
It's the official file system output for taking stuff out of a registry. It's actually seeing some usage now in various places.
It's the formal disconnected. Yeah, BuildKit, a couple others all support it.
Cool.
Okay. Any pointers would be helpful. That is part of the iterations that we'll be doing. The next prototyping that we'll be doing will go into main. Like, that was the feedback. Don't do branches off the side. We'll have a next round of prototyping. So if there's some, I haven't seen pointers to this, so if you have something, please surface it so we can make sure.
I'll go dig up the link to that spec and drop that in the comments.
In the hack doc, please.
Hack doc or the discussion?
There's the hack doc.
I can do both.
Oh, yeah. If you want to put it in the discussion, that's fine too. But the hack doc, just at least for our notes to which we are referring to.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, folks. Thanks. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.